as a motion of a strong and healthy kind. Bathsheba was not a woman to be made a fool of, or a woman to suffer in silence, and how could he endure existence with a spirited wife, to whom at first entering he would be beholden for food and lodging? Moreover, it was not at all unlikely that his wife would fail at her farming, if she had not already done so, and he would then become liable for her maintenance. And what a life such a future of poverty with her would be, the spectre of Fanny constantly between them, harrowing his temper and embittering her words. Thus, for reasons touching on distaste, regret, and shame commingled, he put off his return from day to day, and would have decided to put it off altogether if he could have found anywhere else the ready-made establishment which existed for him there. At this time, the July preceding the September in which we find him at Greenhill Fair, he fell in with a travelling circus which was performing in the outskirts of a northern town. Troy introduced himself to the manager by taming a restive horse of the troop, hitting a suspended apple with a pistol bullet fired from the animal's back when in full gallop, and other feats. For his merits in these, all more or less based upon his experiences as a dragoon guardsman, Troy was taken into the company, and the play of Turpin was prepared with a view to his personation of the chief character. Troy was not greatly elated by the appreciative spirit in which he was undoubtedly treated, but he thought the engagement might afford him a few weeks for consideration. It was thus carelessly, and without having formed any definite plan for the future, that Troy found himself at Greenhill Fair with the rest of the company on this day. And now the mild autumn sun got lower, and in front of the pavilion the following incident had taken place. Bathsheba, who was driven to the fair that day by her odd man Poorgrass, had, like everyone else, read or heard the announcement that Mr. Francis, the great cosmopolitan equestrian and rough rider, would enact the part of Turpin, and she was not yet too old and careworn to be without a little curiosity to see him. This particular show was by far the largest and grandest in the fair, a horde of little shows grouping themselves under its shade like chickens round a hen. The crowd had passed in, and Boldwood, who had been watching all the day for an opportunity of speaking to her, seeing her comparatively isolated, came up to her side. "I hope the sheep have done well to-day, Mrs. Troy," he said nervously. "Oh yes, thank you," said Bathsheba, colour springing up in the centre of her cheeks. "I was fortunate enough to sell them all just as we got up on the hill, so we hadn't to pen them at all." "And now you are entirely at leisure?" "Yes, except that I have to see one more dealer in 2 hours' time. Otherwise I should be going home." He was looking at this large tent and the announcement. "Have you ever seen the play of Turpin's Ride to York? Turpin was a real man, was he not?" "Oh yes, perfectly true, all of it. Indeed, I think I've heard Jan Coggan say that a relation of his knew Tom King, Turpin's friend, quite well. Coggan is rather given to strange stories connected with his relations, we must remember. I hope they can all be believed." "Yes, yes, we know Coggan. But Turpin is true enough. You have never seen it played, I suppose?" "Never. I was not allowed to go into these places when I was young. Hark, what's that prancing? How they shout!" "Black Bess just started off, I suppose. Am I right in supposing you would like to see the performance, Mrs. Troy? Please excuse my mistake, if it is one. But if you would like to, I'll get a seat for you with pleasure." Perceiving that she hesitated, he added, "I myself shall not stay to see it. I've seen it before." Now Bathsheba did care a little to see the show, and had only withheld her feet from the ladder because she feared to go in alone. She had been hoping that Oak might appear, whose assistance in such cases was always accepted as an inalienable right, but Oak was nowhere to be seen, and hence it was that she said, "Then if you will just look in first to see if there's room, I think I will go in for a minute or two." And so a short time after this Bathsheba appeared in the tent, with Boldwood at her elbow, who, taking her to a reserved seat, again withdrew. This feature consisted of one raised bench in a very conspicuous part of the circle, covered with red cloth, and floored with a piece of carpet, and Bathsheba immediately found, to her confusion, that she was the single reserved individual in the tent, the rest of the crowded spectators, one and all, standing on their legs on the border of the arena, where they got twice as good a view of the performance for half the money. Hence, as many eyes were turned upon her, enthroned alone in this place of honour, against the scarlet background, as upon the ponies and clowns who were engaged in preliminary exploits in the centre, Turpin not having yet appeared. Once there, Bathsheba was forced to make the best of it and remain. She sat down, spreading her skirts with some dignity over the unoccupied space on each side of her, and giving a new and feminine aspect to the pavilion. In a few minutes she noticed the fat red nape of Coggan's neck among those standing just below her, and Joseph Poorgrass's saintly profile a little further on. The interior was shadowy with a peculiar shade. The strange luminous semi-opacities of fine autumn afternoons and eves intensified into Rembrandt effects the few yellow sunbeams which came through holes and divisions in the canvas, and spirted like jets of gold dust across the dusky blue atmosphere of haze pervading the tent, until they alighted on inner surfaces of cloth opposite, and shone like little lamps suspended there. Troy, on peeping from his dressing-tent through a slit for reconnoitre before entering, saw his unconscious wife on high before him as described, sitting as queen of the tournament. He started back in utter confusion, for although his disguise effectually concealed his personality, he instantly felt that she would be sure to recognize his voice. He had several times during the day thought of the possibility of some Weatherbury person or other appearing and recognizing him, but he had taken the risk carelessly. "If they see me, let them," he had said. But here was Bathsheba in her own person, and the reality of the scene was so much intenser than any of his prefiguring that he felt he had not half enough considered the point. She looked so charming and fair that his cool mood about Weatherbury people was changed. He had not expected her to exercise this power over him in the twinkling of an eye. Should he go on, and care nothing? He could not bring himself to do that. Beyond a politic wish to remain unknown, there suddenly arose in him now a sense of shame at the possibility that his attractive young wife, who already despised him, should despise him more by discovering him in so mean a condition after so long a time. He actually blushed at the thought, and was vexed beyond measure that his sentiments of dislike towards Weatherbury should have led him to dally about the country in this way. But Troy was never more clever than when absolutely at his wit's end. He hastily thrust aside the curtain dividing his own little dressing space from that of the manager and proprietor, who now appeared as the individual called Tom King, as far down as his waist, and as the aforesaid respectable manager thence to his toes. "There's the devil to pay," said Troy. "How's that?" "Why, there's a blackguard creditor in the tent I don't want to see, who'll discover me and nab me as sure as Satan if I open my mouth. What's to be done?" "You must appear now, I think." "I can't." "But the play must proceed." "Do you give that Turpin has got a bad cold, and can't speak his part, but that he'll perform it just the same without speaking?" The proprietor shook his head. "Anyhow, play or no play, I won't open my mouth," said Troy firmly. "Very well, let me see. I'll tell you how we'll manage," said the other, who perhaps felt it would be extremely awkward to offend his leading man just at this time. "I won't tell them anything about your keeping silence. Go on with the piece, and say nothing, doing what you can by a judicious wink now and then, and a few indomitable nods in the heroic places, you know. They'll never find out that the speeches are omitted." This seemed feasible enough, for Turpin's speeches were not many or long, the fascination of the piece lying entirely in the action, and accordingly the play began, and at the appointed time Black Bess leapt into the grassy circle amid the plaudits of the spectators. At the turnpike scene, where Bess and Turpin were hotly pursued at midnight by the officers, and the half-awake gatekeeper in his tasselled nightcap denies that any horseman has passed, Coggan uttered a broad-chested "Well done!" which could be heard all over the fair above the bleating, and Poorgrass smiled delightedly with a nice sense of dramatic contrast between our hero, who coolly leaps the gate, and halting justice in the form of his enemies, who must needs pull up cumbersomely and wait to be let through. At the death of Tom King he could not refrain from seizing Coggan by the hand and whispering, with tears in his eyes, "Of course he's not really shot, Jan, only seemingly." And when the last sad scene came on, and the body of the gallant and faithful Bess had to be carried out on a shutter by 12 volunteers from among the spectators, Nothing could restrain Poorgrass from lending a hand, exclaiming, as he asked Jan to join him, "'Twill be something